In the last section, we added in an image model class. With this class right here, we're giving Dart a better idea of what values and what type of values we expect to extract from a piece of JSON data. Now the image model is definitely working the way we expect, but you'll notice that on this line right here, where we create our instance of an image model, we have to write a little bit of laborious code. Like we have to look at the parse JSON hash, or the parse JSON map, and we have to pull out both that ID property and the URL property. Now, if we just have these two properties inside of here, well, it's not the worst thing in the world, but you can imagine that if we had like 10 different properties coming out of a blob of JSON, we would definitely not want to have to write them all out in a real long argument list to the image model constructor. So in this section, we're going to figure out a better way of creating a new image model instance out of a blob of JSON. So ultimately, what I want to do is only write something that looks like this. I'm going to zoom in here just so you can see that line. So it would be really great if we could create a new image model and just pass in all that JSON and have the image model itself figure out how to extract properties from that and initialize itself. But here's the issue with this. If we mutate the image model constructor and say that this thing always expects to be called with some JSON, then we lose the ability to more manually create an image model. Like, let's say that you and I want to create an image model manually, and you and I want to pass in an ID of 10 and whatever URL we might want to pass in. Well, if we change our image model constructor to always expect to get some JSON, we'd lose out on the ability to make an image model with our own custom arguments, like so. We would instead have to assemble a map object and pass that in. So it seems to me like it would be really great if we had more than one way of creating an image model. Fortunately, we do. So that's exactly what we're going to do here. I'm going to clean up that line of code. There we go. So the idea here is that we want to have the ability to create an image model out of a big chunk of JSON, but we also want to have the ability to create an image model out of like a list of arguments that you and I manually provide. So to do so, we're going to go down to our image model class. Right now, we have exactly one constructor inside of here. The constructor is designated because we use the name of the class for this function right here. However, we are allowed to add in multiple constructors to a single class if we want to. So underneath that existing constructor, I can add in something called a named constructor. We can add in a named constructor by writing out image model, a dot, and then the name of the constructor that we want to create. So in this case, we are trying to create an image model out of some JSON. So I'm going to give this constructor a name of from JSON, like so. So now we can create an image model either by calling image model and passing in the ID and the URL, but we can also create an image model by calling new image model.fromJSON, and then we'll pass in our JSON data to this thing and have the image model figure out how to extract properties out of that and assign them to the ID and URL instance variables. So to make sure that this thing properly extracts some data, we're going to receive the argument of JSON. And actually, we can't call this, we don't really want to call this JSON right here because technically up here, this package convert imports an object called JSON already. So I don't really want to reuse that JSON name anywhere in my code. So I'll call this right here, we'll reuse that variable name of like, how about parse JSON or something like that. It's not a big deal. If we called this thing JSON, there would be no conflict, but we're just going to make our code a little bit more clear and just call it parse JSON just to make sure it's evident that, yeah, this is supposed to be some parsed bit of JSON. So then after this, we can add in some curly braces that are going to give us the ability to extract some values out of that parse JSON object and insert them into our instance variables of ID and URL. All right, so inside of here, I'll say ID is parsed JSON. I'll put my square braces down, or square brackets, and I'll do ID. And I'll do the same thing with URL, parsed JSON, URL, like so. Okay, so that's it. Now we have the ability to create an image model with the default constructor right here, where we're going to call new image model and directly pass in an ID and a URL. But we also have the ability to create a new image model from some JSON, where we just pass in this big blob of JSON data. So now back up here, we can make use of that new constructor. So rather than saying new image model and passing in all that JSON, we're going to say new image model dot from JSON, like so. So now the result is the same as it was before. We pass in this JSON data, but we don't have to iterate all through all those different properties. We only had to do that one time when we set up this named constructor down here. After we call from JSON, we get back our new instance of image model, we assign it to the image model variable, and then we can freely access the different properties on it. So now I will run this again, and we should still see our URL appear up here. And come on. I know this thing wants to run, it's just being a little bit hesitant. Let's try a different property. Oh, there we go. Okay, URL, very good. And we can do ID as well. And we'll get back 1 again. Okay, so that's it. That's how we handle JSON data. We get back some raw JSON from maybe making an API request or whatever it might be. We call json.decode, and then we will very commonly make a model class. We might add a constructor to it called a named constructor that will take that big blob of JSON, it'll extract the values we care about, and assign it to the new instance of the model. So now that we have a better idea of how to work with JSON, we'll flip back over to our real project, and we're going to put this image model class to work. So quick break, and I'll see you in just a minute.